My name is Avrohom Feldheim, the founder of Machon, Menoras, Hachochmah, and I'm here with Rabbi Weissmann, the director. And we're going to take you through a course, a language arts course that was created for yeshivas. Now, I would just want to start with why we created this content, why we created this curriculum. This is in the demographics of yeshivas, and I'm hoping you get a glimpse of what we're doing, and maybe you could take the ideas and innovation for your own schools. In the yeshiva system, the general studies is not so focused on. It's an afternoon. Kids are tired. Kids are, went through a long morning, and they've been studying the Talmud, the Torah, and we start our general studies at 3:30 till approximately 6:30, and then we have a night seder review of what they learned in the morning. So it's a pretty long day, and boys aren't interested. They're not, let's say, college bound as right now in their mind. Most of our students, if not all of them, go to Beis Medrash or go to Israel to study, and they think about college when they're in their, in the 20s, and they're not focused on thinking about college at this time. So how do you turn on that light? How do you get them interested? How do you get them excited? What's going to get them intrinsically motivated to be successful in the afternoon? So I just want to quickly talk about 3 pillars that we really created our curriculum on. And that's just the number one being cultural relevance. For students to be engaged, the material has to talk to them. It has to be something that they connect with, something that they're excited about. Number 2, it has to be something that they feel they're gaining from. So it has to be skills that are life prep skills that they feel like I'm gaining, it's worth my time. Number 3 is they have to be engaged with task-oriented. You have to give them the tools to do the work. No one wants to sit up and just listen and listen and listen, which is already, I think, the 5th presentation today, so everyone's exhausted. But they're already in this for 5-6 hours. So you got to give them the tools and the skills to create the material that the presentations and assignments and lecturing, we give it to them to do. So Rabbi Weissmann will walk you through a language arts course.
Thank you, Rabbi Feldheim. So one thing we tell all of our students in all of our schools across the demographics is that the Torah is something that is timeless and speaks to every single thing we do in our lives. It's a Torah's Chaim. However, in some of our schools, despite the fact that we say it's a Torah's Chaim, we turn that off for a few hours in the afternoon. And the biggest disservice we can do our students is turn off the Torah lens, turn off the Torah perspective from 3:30 to 6:30, or for whenever it may be. We need to teach our students that if we're saying in the morning, if we're saying in our Kodesh classes that the Torah speaks to every facet of our lives, that it has a relevance in language arts, it has a relevance in history, it has relevance in science, it has relevance in math, it has a relevance in every single thing you do. That is how we prepare our students for life after graduation. So with this in mind, we've taken an integrated approach to language arts, to all the general studies, and I want to speak about our 11th grade language arts course. So the way this class is designed is that there are 2 documents, 2 packets you have in front of you. One is, this is for the Unit 8 of this course. It's the teacher's guide and worksheets. This is mostly a teacher-facing packet. And then we also have a Marmakomos packet, a source book. This is student-facing. So the way the class works is that if you open up the teacher's guide and worksheets, you'll see a video snapshot of Tzvi Mordechai Feldheim. He's the Rosh Masifta of Kesser Torah in Baltimore. And he begins each unit. In our yeshiva, he comes to the classroom. In other schools, there's a video with a question he has for the students, something he's thinking about related to the Parsha, the upcoming Yantif. So for this unit, he asked the boys 2 questions. The first question was, I'll just read it to you. Since Hashem placed the Jews in Mitzrayim to begin with, why do we celebrate Yetzias Mitzrayim and praise Hashem for taking us out? And he gives an amazing mashal, an amazing example, an analogy. For example, if someone broke your arm, you would ask them to pay for the cast. That's reasonable. However, you would not praise them for giving you the check, which seems like an obvious thing, but yet Pesach night at the Seder, thank you Hashem for putting us in Mitzrayim, but let's just think about this for a minute because Hashem put us in Mitzrayim. Let's give some context. And we're asking the students to consider questions they may not normally have thought about. The second question is, why didn't Hashem only inflict one makkah upon the Mitzrim, upon the Egyptians, makos bechoros? If that was the makkah that finally convinced Paro to let the Jews go, then just begin there. So we ask these students these two questions, and then we have 10 lessons. And each lesson is broken apart with learning goals, guiding questions. We have a specific methodology with how you chunk the information, how you give over the information, and the most important piece is that despite the fact that the Chomer, the content here, is all Torah sources, it's all aligned with the National Common Core standards. We took a lot of time doing research of pretty much all 50 states, and what we found is as follows, which is not the case in other countries necessarily, is that for private schools, with a few exceptions in regard to certain readings, historical readings, the requirements of private schools is skills. It is not content, which means that we have a fantastic opportunity to find content that will actually speak to our students, content that they can find meaning with. It's just our job to ensure that that content will also teach them how to write, reading comprehension skills, grammar, mechanics, how to be able to articulate themselves. This is all in regard to language arts, whatever it may be. And we found that's completely possible because the Chomer, Torah is timeless, and that is what speaks, that's what speaks to our students. And we need to find a way to have our students be inspired throughout the day if we want to be successful. So if you look in the teacher's guide and worksheets, you'll see those aligned standards, and I'll discuss some of them in a bit. But after we ask these questions to the students, their response is, okay, what's the answer so I can write my essay or I can give my speech? Well, that's not teaching them to become independent learners, and we want them to be at the driver's seat of their own education. Or else, once they graduate, they're not going to be able to know how to do things on their own. So we teach them a research skill of how to break apart a question. So if you're to look at, this is in the teacher's guide, you'll see a slideshow, one of the first few pages. So the first question was, since Hashem placed the Jews in Mitzrayim to begin with, wait a second, Hashem placed the Jews in Mitzrayim, where do I know that from? Well, put it in context. Avram Avinu once received a nevuah, a prophecy, in Bereshis, where at the Bris Ben and Basarim, the covenant between the parts, where he was told his descendants would end up in exile. Maybe I should look there. Maybe that's my point of entry. We also spoke about, in this question, the idea of celebrating Yetzias Mitzrayim. Well, what is that mitzvah? Let's look in Sefer HaChinuch. We give some other suggestions. The idea of appreciation. Thank you to Hashem, Hakaras HaTov. That's another point of entry. If you want to talk about why do we have appreciation for Hashem, let's define what Hakaras HaTov is. Let's define what that relationship between us and someone that we receive something from, in this case Hashem, is meant to be. And with the other question, when you're discussing the makos, you're talking about mida keneged mida, which is the concept that we are punished or rewarded in the manner in which we did an action. It's meted out measure for measure. And everything I just did with you and much more aligns with the standards. For example, initiate and participate effectively in a range of collaborative discussions, one-on-one, in groups, teacher-led. They go through topics, texts, issues, building on others' ideas and expressing their own clearly and persuasively. Present information, findings, and supporting evidence, conveying a clear and distinct perspective, and it goes on. And these are all the things that we're doing to equip our students with a toolkit that will allow them to do whatever it is they want to do when they decide to go out into the world. Now, all those points of entry that I just discussed became a different section in the Marmakomos in the source packet. We have a section of sources related to the reason for exile, the concept of Kor HaBarzel, the idea that the Jews were taken out of this iron furnace, which refined them and their character, Hakaras HaTov, appreciation, mida keneged mida, this idea of measure for measure, the reasons for the makos, and finally the final makkah, makas bechoros. And as the students go through all their worksheets and all their lessons, which again are aligned with all the standards so they can gain the skills, they go through this source packet where there are sources here with the original Hebrew, with the translation, or a summary. We also give brief biographical information. Who wrote this? What time period is this? Where was this written? It's amazing how many students mention the names of great rabbis but have no idea how to categorize them historically. Is the Ramban a Rishon? Is he an Achron? Well, if in yeshiva you mention his name multiple times a week, I want you to graduate knowing where to place him historically. It's very important. So just a few examples in the time we have. The first source is a Gemara that discusses 3 reasons. It is page 4 in your source packet. 3 reasons that the Gemara discusses why Avram Avinu's descendants were going to end up in exile. And you go through the source with the students, and you have the discussion, and you play upon everything you need for language arts, and you move on. And then the next source is a Maharal, where he comments on this piece of Agadita, this Gemara. And he says, let's find the common theme between these three pieces, these three instances, or these three reasons why Avram Avinu's descendants end up in Mitzrayim. The common theme that runs among them, and you'll have to look at the source yourself because of time, but they're all instances in where seemingly Avram Avinu's emunah is a degree lower, where his faith and his trust in Hashem is being challenged, and he's struggling with it. And then the Maharal discusses, since that's the common theme, and we know, as the source said, the response is descendants going to Mitzrayim, going into exile, then therefore, that is the place where his descendants will be able to improve upon themselves, be able to work on their emunah. And then you say to the students, well, what is it about Egypt? What is it about being in exile that will allow you to work and refine your degree of emunah, faith and trust in Hashem? And then to find meaning in the text, as we've been speaking about at this conference, you ask about it in their own lives. When you find that you're struggling with something, what is the best place that you can situate yourself in order to work on whatever it may be? And that idea of the Kor HaBarzel, if you turn to page 15, the Maharal speaks about this idea of the Kor HaBarzel, and he explains it's a metaphor. Now, in a standard language arts class, you need to teach a metaphor, and you explain it, and you students write using it, and you move on. But here's an opportunity for the students to find meaning. He talks about how the Kor HaBarzel, this idea of the Jews were taken out of the iron furnace, but Hashem took us out without tongues, without that barrier, that separation. And when Hashem took us, he took us when we were at in the heat of the furnace, when we were experiencing our most difficult experience. And that is when the barrier dropped and we can connect with Hashem. What an idea for students to hear in school, in Judaic studies, or in English class, that when I'm at my weakest, that's when I can connect the most. And then we have similar sources with Mida Keneged Mida, the idea that if something happens to me based on the action I had, it teaches me a certain degree of responsibility, which again applies to their own lives, with their interactions with their peers and at home, and thinking about the future. And the idea of Hakar Satov, it's very interesting. There's a Rabbeinu Bechaya that we show the students that we actually have to have Hakar Satov for the Mitzri, for the Egyptian that Moshe killed. Why? Because if he didn't do what he did, that brought Moshe Rabbeinu to kill him, Moshe Rabbeinu would not have left Egypt, and everything would not have unraveled in the way it did. Meaning, what are you telling the students? We may experience difficulties in our lives. Horrible things may happen, but it's ultimately going to be for our best. And this is a way that you can find meaning in the text. There are opportunities to find meaning when you're reading more works in the classic Western canon, but for students where this is not necessarily what speaks to them, here is a fantastic opportunity. There are also opportunities here for differentiating instruction. A lot of times sources will have a few different sources that say the same thing, but there are different levels of difficulty, different entry points. There are some sources in here, I think one specifically in this packet, in Or Gedaliahu, which we did not translate because we felt it was for more advanced students. It's an opportunity to show them. And then finally, this unit happens to end with public speaking. Other units end with essays, and there's an example on the guidebook. But this unit that ends with public speaking, we have the students also do a written assignment where they pretend that they're going to be an audience at a Shalosh Idus, but each student gets a different audience member profile. You are the businessman in the room. You are the doctor. You are somebody who's in yeshiva. You're an out-of-town guest. And then the students do a creative writing piece where they write up a profile of who they are and what's going on with them before they walk into the Shalosh Idus. And then you say to the student, okay, you just spent however long it was doing research to answer this question, but now you have to adapt it to these 10 people who are in the audience. Just another skill that you can work on with students. So again, the idea is we're trying to allow the students to find meaning in the text. We're taking students who, at least in our demographic, are not necessarily college bound, and finding a way to teach them the skills that they need to know in a manner that's going to speak to them. But there are definitely opportunities to use this material in other ways too, in Judaic studies classes, in schools that are not necessarily focused on boys. We make some accommodations, but we really feel that this is an opportunity that we have for our students. Thank you.
Great. Questions? Where's the mic?
Yes.
Using Torah texts and Torah ideas for this sort of language arts, literary analysis type of thing, what would be the situation if there's observations that would be explored in a class looking at a work of literature that would be more, let's say, not going with the tried and true answers that we would have in a Torah class, for instance, talking about how Bnei Israel being in Egypt is something that, that's where they built their Emunah. They spend the next 40 years in the desert kvetching. That doesn't seem like very Emunah behavior to me. Or if you're talking about everything, even bad things that happen being for the best, what does that say about determinism? Do we, was there any way to stop this thing from happening, where you would have maybe a more philosophical discussion in a language arts class about a secular text, but maybe the teacher would pull back and be like, well, because it's a more traditional answer that we would give to those type of things.
So I think part of the answer to that question is, who is the teacher? A lot of this requires very much changing the teacher profile, because obviously the teacher needs to be someone who that school's administration feels comfortable with discussing more deeper philosophical, hashkafic ideas in the text. As well, because of these deeper questions, sometimes the most powerful thing you can say to a student is, you know what, I like your question. I see where you're going, what you're struggling with. Let me speak to your Rebbe. Let me speak to the Manal, because what is the student here? My English teacher has something to do with my Rebbe. My Rebbe speaks to my English teacher. And also, they recognize that they value what's going on more. But also, it lends an opportunity for interdepartmental and interdisciplinary discussions, where what I tell teachers, and we do this in Kesser Torah too, before we start any one of these units, you have to tell the Rebbe what they're talking about in the afternoon, because now the students are going to be thinking about these questions and asking the questions that you just mentioned. So this only works if you have buy-in, not just by the teacher, not just by the General Studies Administration, but every stakeholder in the school, because we want the students to grow, and we want to be asking difficult questions, but we need to make sure we have the proper people who are there who can answer them.
Any other questions?
I really appreciate the way you have connected to the Common Core standard, and thank you for making that explicit. As you were doing that, or you are doing that, are you finding things that are in tension as in addition to the things you're finding that actually fit very nicely?
They definitely fit very nicely. It's really things that we already are teaching a lot of the students, but we don't. It happens intuitively. A lot of times when we say these ideas out to the students, what is actually going on when we're narrating the process, I'll hear students say, oh, that's exactly what we did in the morning in Gemara. They just never thought about it. So a lot of these things, it's more pointing it out to them. It's not necessarily teaching them something new always, because it's really all there, and it's part of our tradition.